All right. We're live, everybody, celebrating Jackie Lau's release, The Stand-Up Groomsman. We are here with Jackie Lau and Jenny Holiday, and we're so excited. Take it away. All right. We're live, everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Holiday. We're here to celebrate Jackie Lau's release date of The Stand-Up Groomsman, which I don't know, Jackie, is it book 2 or is it a standalone?
Yeah, I mean, it's book 2 of the series, I guess, after Donut Fall in Love. The characters, they're secondary characters in Donut Fall in Love. But if you haven't read it, I think it stands on its own pretty well.
Yes, I think it does too. I say that as somebody who read Donut Fall in Love and like remember about 75% of it, which is good for me because I have the worst memory known to man, and it definitely works as a standalone. So tell us a little bit about this book. Do you hate that question as much as I hate that question?
Yeah. So this book is about Mel and Vivian. Mel's a stand-up comedian and Vivian works in finance. And they're friends of Ryan and Lindsay, who are the main couple in Donut Fall in Love. And Vivian and Mel actually have a bit of a meet cute disaster or a meet awkward, I don't know what you would call it, in Donut Fall in Love. So before that, Vivian was a fan of Mel's stand-up comedy and one of the sitcoms he was on, but then their first meeting does not go well. And after that, they pretty much kept their distance, but now their friends are getting married and they're both going to be in the wedding party.
Okay, I want to ask you a bunch of more questions, but I actually want to back up for a minute and just tell audience members, you can ask questions and they are going to appear in our chat somehow. I'm not exactly sure, but we're going to answer your questions. So if you've got any questions, comments, please feel free to hit us up at any time. Okay, so I loved this book because it has a bunch of like my favorite things in it. And I don't know if you would call them tropes, but I'm just going to call them things for lack of a better word. And one of them you just mentioned, and I'm hoping we can go down my list. I love these as a reader mostly, but I also love them as a writer. So I'm just curious to see like what your thoughts are about them. And the one that you hit on was weddings. I love a wedding in a romance novel because it's sort of like this delightful artificial situation that throws people together, and it's usually throws them together like more than once because there's a bachelorette party or whatever. Like, give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, you had a whole series about weddings, right?
Well, so I guess when I say I love it, I really mean it.
So yeah, but I guess I have written weddings in books before. A few. I actually sort of have a indie series planned that's around weddings. But one of the things that I thought I wanted to have was like a big Chinese 10-course wedding banquet in a book, which is something I don't think you see a lot of. But yeah, weddings are just sort of great places to bring people together, to force them to spend time together when they wouldn't otherwise have to do so. And just sort of lots of opportunity for drama, big events, that sort of thing.
And oftentimes opportunities for like embarrassing, not like, I don't think either of us are really into like super, gross, embarrassing stuff, but like slightly embarrassing things. Like they have to play some games in this book. And sort of, I don't know, like it to me, it also throws the friendship dynamic between the characters, like not the two main characters, but it throws the friendship groups into sort of stark relief. It's sort of like a lot of stuff on steroids, I think, when you're at a wedding.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. The other one is one person is famous and the other person isn't, which you have going in both these books.
Yeah. So that's sort of
expound on that a little bit.
So what some people call like the Notting Hill trope, because I guess that's a famous movie like that. I mean, part of the reason it just presents a lot of opportunity for conflict, I suppose. In Notting Hill, where he opens the door and there's just a huge crowd of reporters and paparazzi on the doorstep. just this sort of fish out of water situation too, with someone being perhaps experiencing fame in a way they haven't before. Now in this book, he's not like Anna Scott or anything like that levels of famous. So they're not dealing with that so much, but what they're more dealing with is she sort of knew him as a performer first. So she knows who his like, stand-up persona and his character in the sitcom. So that's how she sort of knows him, but doesn't really know him before she meets him for the first time.
And I feel like Notting Hill, if I'm remembering it correctly, she's a bit, I mean, obviously she's not famous, but she's kind of like the type of person who doesn't like the spotlight. She's not going to kind of roll with like paparazzi, or not that he's that level of famous, but she's not somebody who is seeking out attention.
Yeah. The heroine in this book definitely is not looking for attention. And when they do karaoke, she's horrified at the idea of anyone wanting her to sing, even just around a group of friends.
So, I mean, I think that when person is famous, sort of like takes the, I don't know what you would call it, like not enemies to lovers, but takes sort of like a rivals kind of setup. And again, like the weddings, like amps it up a little bit, because not only do you have these, maybe it's opposites. This is more like opposites attract. It takes opposites attract and adds this, like the wedding, this thing that it's really out of their control, but it amps up the thing, which in this case is opposites attract.
Yeah. This book is definitely an opposites attract. And this is the sort of, the fame is one dimension of it, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so the third thing that I love about this book, and is one of my favorite romance things generally, is people who think they hate each other, but they don't actually hate each other. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that generally. And I'd also like to hear your thoughts about whether you, like me, find that a little bit challenging to write.
So I guess it's sort of enemies to lovers, but I really struggle with some enemies to lovers books, and I don't really write them much. I like sort of more rivals to lovers more, I think, as a reader, but this isn't a rivals to lovers book, because they're not rivals at all. Enemies to lovers is difficult because you have to like genuinely like the people, but also, understand why they hate each other kind of at the same time.
Right.
And sometimes if you make it really clear why they hate each other, then the reader just hates one or both of the characters. So it can be hard to do it well. And so I sort of wanted this to be where they were sort of, when they first met, they were kind of seeing a situation through a different lens, I guess you could say. The problem with that, though, is because the meeting is in Donut Fall in Love. Some people are probably like, oh, I just don't want to read a book about these two characters at all. So it's sort of can be difficult to set that up in a previous book.
I guess I'm thinking more like, like the sort of like the delightful dopes who don't realize what's going on, like right in front of their eyes, like they like protesting too much, almost like at the beginning, they don't like each other. Yeah. But they do like each other. They articulate to the world and to themselves that they don't like each other, or that they rub each other the wrong way. Maybe he's a little more, sweet on her, but I just find that like totally charming when there's, especially with like a self-aware character, which I think both of these people are, that they have this like blind spot where they just really truly seem to believe that they do not like this other person. Yeah. But we can sort of see the joke. I love that. But I do think it's hard because you don't want to, like, lack of self-awareness in real life is an extremely annoying trait. And I think we've all probably dealt with people in our lives that you want to slap, not because of romantic stuff, but for sure. I don't know. It's sort of hard to articulate how you can make that work, I guess. I know. I don't know how to articulate it either. I just know that I find it hard because you don't want, I'm not really good at talking about romance because I'm not a critic, and I have a lot of respect for critics. And I'm not really good at, I never teach master classes or anything like that because I don't really have like a lot of self-awareness here, again, about like the craft of writing. I know that sounds sort of stupid, but I just find you gotta make these people believable. But if there's this gap between their self-knowledge and how they're presenting it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting too deeply into the weeds here, but anyway, I loved that little aspect of the book. It's one of my favorites. Okay, let's talk a little more about prickly heroines. So I would say that Vivian is prickly. And for me, that's a compliment, not a complaint. So maybe two-pronged question. Can you tell us a little bit about Vivian for people who haven't read the book? That's part one. And then after that, let's talk a little bit about the so-called prickly heroine criticism.
So Vivian is in her 30s and she works in finance, but it's not like she absolutely loves her job. It's something that she's good at and she doesn't mind doing, but it's basically something she has to do. And she enjoys drawing on the side, and she's done some like fan art for the show that Mel was on that he was really impressed with. And her childhood sort of informs a lot about how she lives her adult life. She's the oldest daughter of 4 kids, and she was, in Am I the Asshole terms, parentified a lot as a kid, and had to basically bring up her youngest 2 siblings, while her brother, who was close in age to her, didn't have to do much at all. And so she resents that, and she's like, that's part of the reason she doesn't want to have children, but also she just has really firm boundaries that my adult life is for me. I'm going to do the things that I didn't get the chance to do as a kid, like the art and stuff like that. And so she has very firm boundaries because of her childhood, and she doesn't have a great relationship with her family as well. So,
and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that is all true, and beyond, even more than that, she's just kind of a bit like reserved. Just how she is. She's kind of reserved, and maybe even sometimes that comes off as a little bit awkward. And she just doesn't, she's not like a warm, fuzzy person, which I think, we're often as a society conditioned to notice when women are not like that.
Yeah, she's definitely not the person you'd have as like the bubbly, energetic, friendly person. She's
like, and in Donut Fall in Love, or maybe it's early in this book. I mean, she seems a little surprised by her friendship with Lindsay. Lindsay's the heroine of the first book of Donut Fall in Love, and they meet because they're roommates.
Yes.
I'm just sort of filling in the blanks here.
Yeah.
Anyone
so
hasn't read it.
In one of the first scenes in the stand-up Groomsman, Lindsay tells her that she's engaged, and she's like, I feel like I should be more enthusiastic. Like it's just not like she's happy for her friend, but it's just not her to show like over the top, oh my God, I'm so happy for you kind of enthusiasm. And she feels like she should do that, but it's not her at all. Which is very much in contrast to the hero. So, yeah. And what was I going to say? The other thing about Vivian is because of her childhood as well, she thinks of herself as people love her because she's useful. Like she was always doing things for her family, and even though she has boundaries, she still, like her family asked her to do things for them, and she feels like that's why people care about her. And in her last relationship, she was doing most of the housework and that sort of thing. And so to her, being in love, whether it's romantically or otherwise, is very much like she gives and people take from her. And she is not really interested in relationships at present because of that. She just would prefer to be doing her own thing.
Right. Like her response to that is to really prioritize independence rather than thinking about trying to have a different kind of relationship. She just kind of nopes out of the whole sort of social scene, and Lindsay sort of sneaks in there as a friend, but there isn't a huge, but I'm making it sound like she doesn't come off as like some pathetic loner. She just kind of has carefully crafted this life that gets upended by this crazy dude.
Yeah, she's definitely one of those people who has like big kind of walls around her.
Right.
Yeah.
And so do you ever get any blowback from this book or other books of yours? I mean, not Lindsay, obviously, but about prickly heroines, or am I just projecting?
Yeah, like definitely there's some readers who like love the sort of grumpy hero, but are way more critical of heroines. And I do see a little bit of that with this book, but not, I don't know, came out today.
Yeah, so like my take on that is, number one, why are heroines prickly? And that's generally a bad thing. You know, not in like hardcore, like probably not the people who are in the audience for this. These are like hardcore romance landia people who probably love a prickly heroine. But in general, the idea is that a heroine is prickly, it's a bad thing. But then the hero is never prickly, he's grumpy, and that's a good thing, you know.
And then if he's tortured, it's kind of like lovable, or like not lovable exactly, but like,
yeah, it's
people really feel for him.
It's right, and it's like a character trait that I mean, and I'm guilty of it too. Like I enjoy reading a tortured hero, like have to deal with his shit, you know. Whereas I feel like there's less tolerance for that among women in books and in real life.
Yeah,
and it irritates me.
Yeah, it does irritate me too. I have had like some. I don't think Vivian's exactly like, so grumpy isn't a word I would use, like, because she's more sort of like buttoned up a bit and reserved.
Well,
so,
and sorry.
I have had heroines that I more think of as straight up grumpy.
Right.
Whereas Vivian is not exactly. And like some people really do like that kind of heroine, right? And those other books I've written were indie books that were like later in the series. So I think by the time people were reading them, that was something they were really like looking for. And I like put it in the title of the book.
Right.
And I don't know if you saw the whole thing where people it was maybe just the Twitter thing, people were talking about reverse Grumpy Sunshine. Do you see this?
So no.
And there was a whole controversy or, you know, debate because Grumpy Sunshine doesn't specify gender, right?
Right.
So you shouldn't
but
have
we
to
assume,
say,
everybody assume, yeah, okay.
We assume the grumpy person is the hero. It's also like very, you know, heteronormative.
Right.
Yeah, reverse Grumpy Sunshine being when the woman's grumpy, but like we shouldn't say reverse because
we don't need the modifier, right?
Yeah, we don't need the modifier, right? Like it's not like it's a grumpy hero sunshine heroine trope that we call it usually. So yeah, like there's definitely an audience for heroines like this, and I think people relate to her in some cases.
I think there's an audience too. I just feel like, and this is just going to be me like venting a little bit here, but I feel like when I hear from people about who don't like my books, you know, and it's not like I hear from them a lot, but I do get a lot, you know, I get email from people who don't like my books. It's, you know, it's one of three things. And one of those things is, and they wouldn't characterize it like this, but it's complaining about the heroine. Like, I think the most extreme example was I had a book where I don't think really think she was grumpy at all, but she was not interested in a relationship. And there was a reviewer who was reviewing the book and would tweet about the book, but would put it on auto tweet, so it would tweet like 17 times a day for a month and tag me on it. And so, you know, you'd go to the review and you know, it was like a 2-star review, and she, like, the headline was that the heroine was emotionally stunted. And I was like, you know what, maybe she is a little emotionally stunted, but aren't we all? Like, isn't that kind of the point of like a life? And, you know, to become less emotionally stunted, and romance novels.
And a lot of heroes are emotionally stunted, right?
Right. So. Like, what do you even mean by emotionally stunted? I mean, anyway, that's just a little like, I feel like I hear from people who are mad, you know, but they don't say prickly. This is like my own shorthand. They say immature or, you know, slutty or whatever. Like there's these other words that I feel like I've never had anybody say anything negative to me, like to my face, about a hero. It's only ever heroines that I hear about. Yeah,
like, so in this case, the heroine's not promiscuous, but I've had that too. I've written some heroines who are like quite clearly more promiscuous than the hero, like that's stated on page. And so those two books were actually so far the books that have made me the most money on Amazon as an indie author.
Love it. Well, and I think these are indie books, because I feel like that's one thing that, like, I feel like indie has room for things that maybe traditional publishers aren't interested in. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I do to some extent. It sort of depends, like, who you're trying to get to read your books too, I feel like, because you can easily get into an audience in indie as well, where you have people expecting different things from your heroes and heroines. I generally like to go against some of the typical gender norms that you see in male-female romance.
Well, and I think that actually, like, to a certain extent, you get positive attention for doing that among a certain crowd. It just may feel like a smaller, a smaller crowd than. Okay, so I have some more questions, but we've got a few questions from the audience. Do you mind if we detour and take those?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so Courtney asked, and I think probably the Courtney that is speaking is both your and my literary agent. If that's the case, hello. What's a trope you haven't gotten to write yet for both Jackie and Jenny? Want to go first?
Okay, well, I haven't written Marriage of Convenience or Runaway Bride, which are both things I do plan to write in the future. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple that I'm not sure I plan to write, but those ones I do plan to write.
Yeah, I have never written Marriage in Trouble, and I don't, you should never say never, but I don't think I ever will. Just no yuck to anyone's yum, just kind of not my thing. And I would have said I would never write Secret Baby. But the older I get and the more kind of books I have under my belt, the more I kind of look at these things almost as like fun little challenges. So I don't know, maybe I'll write Secret Baby someday. But let me invert that. What are there tropes that you find yourself drawn to writing again and again?
Yeah, I would say like fake dating and friends to lovers. Even like neighbors to a certain extent, I guess.
Yeah, I think that it's I find myself doing, like, the books that come the easiest to me are usually a certain set of tropes, like a few tropes, and when I stray from that, I'm not saying that the books aren't successful, but I have a harder time writing them. Like, I have a hard time writing second chance romance. I just I don't know why. You could like psychoanalyze me, but I think it's because I'd never ever have taken up with an ex. Just not my thing.
Yeah, I have written second chance, but it's not something that I plan to write a lot of. I think also with that and Marriage in Trouble, actually, they're both kind of angsty tropes, I would say. Like and I don't really write angsty. So,
right.
So,
and I have written some angstier books, and I don't know, but I don't know, like, I can't mentally get over to, like, we are done, you are dead to me. So I think I project that into not even so much my writing. I think I could like suspend disbelief when I write, but I project it into my reading. And then if I'm not writing a book that I would really read, it becomes tough.
Yeah.
Okay, so That's So Poe asked another question for Jackie. What's the experience of writing Trad Pub for this series been versus your other indie published series?
So one of the big differences is really timelines. So like this book, I struggle to talk about sometimes because I came up with the idea early in 2020.
Right.
And if I'd come up with the idea early in 2020 for an indie book, it would have like been published for 2 years at this point.
Right.
So that's honestly, one of the big things for me is the timelines. Like this book was done, like basically done more than 6 months in advance, right? Whereas for indie books, occasionally I've started them 6 months before they came out.
Right.
So that's one of the big differences. It's also like these books are longer as well. Like my indie stuff is usually shorter.
Right.
And it is nice though to be able to go into the bookstore and see your book on the shelf. I do like that. Like I didn't think I cared so much about it, but then it happened. I was like, yeah, kind of cool, right? And I think some people don't really see you as a real author until they can do that. Yeah, so.
All right, and That's so Poe also asked, some of your characters are bi. Are you planning to write any same-sex relationships?
So I do have one, actually. I have an MM called Bidding for the Bachelor that came out last year. I don't have any plans to write any others at this time, but it may happen in the future.
I did like how their shared bisexuality was something that the two characters in this book sort of, they appreciated the understanding that came with that from the other person. I mean, I think particularly Vivian had not had an easy a time kind of with how she felt other people perceived that about her, and he was just, it's just not an issue with him. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's like estranged from his father over it though, so it's sort of like there was that, but like that did happen almost 20 years ago, and
well, I don't mean that he doesn't have a hard time, that he didn't have a hard time with it, but that he accepts that about her. It's just like a non-issue in their relationship, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So that was part of it. So with her ex, it definitely was an issue, and so, but with him, it's not at all. That's one of the things she did.
Right. Okay. I want to kind of back up and build on that. So Poe's previous question. One of the things that people, I mean, I know you pretty well, and I've been like around other people together with you, and people always remark on how much you write. Like, you put out so many books, and they and I, inquiring minds, want to know, how do you do that?
Well, I don't have another job, and I don't have kids, and I don't have a house. I live in an apartment. I don't have a home to care for. So like, I just basically don't have much else going on in my life. Is part of it.
Okay, well, I will accept that as a partial answer, but I also think that you might, to me, you seem to have quite a like a work ethic, but B, like system of organization that like projection that projects out into the future.
Yeah, but that's sort of just the way I've always been, basically. Right, like time management, I've always been good at. I've always been the person who never finished anything. Like, I was a person who basically had it done like days in advance. I pulled all-nighters. I never like stayed up late finishing things, because I like organized my time such that,
right,
everything was spread. So it was just sort of similar to the way I did homework back when I was in school.
So your personality just sort of fits this job well. Seems like.
Well, I mean, there are other ways you can make it work, but I'm very like internally driven. So I don't need external deadlines and stuff to help me get stuff done, which can be an advantage. It's not like necessary, but like it can be an advantage, yeah.
So how does that translate to like a day-to-day, like take us through your writing process? I hate that phrase.
So I only work on one project at a time, but I switch off between drafts. So I'll write like the first draft for one project, and then I'll like do edits on something else, and then do the second draft for another project, and then go back to the first project. So on a given day, I'm only working on one thing, but I'm switching off every 1 to 4 weeks, depending on projects. So when I'm writing a first draft, which is like at most a quarter of the time, then I can write 4,000 words 5 to 6 days a week.
Wow.
16 pages.
Need my smelling salts here.
That's with plotting. Like I outline chapter by chapter in advance.
So you're writing the 4,000 words of a book that's already been plotted.
Yes, yeah. But it doesn't take me too long to plot, but like it does take a few. I like recently revised a book that I plotted in like half a day, and I was like, oh, this kind of shows. I should have spent more time on that. So yeah.
So you're a plot. It's safe to say you're a plotter, not a pantser.
Definitely a plotter. Yeah. Like chapter, like, and I do everything chronologically. Like my brain only thinks chronologically, so.
So you write, you sit down and write from beginning to end.
And I edit like that too. Yeah, so, and I usually, before I turn it to betas or an editor, I do 3 drafts. So the first draft, and then I let it sit for a while, work on something else, and then I read through the whole thing, make notes, and then I revise it from the beginning chronologically. And then I read it all over again. Then I set it aside and then do the same thing a couple months later. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear other people's like ways of doing it, because I mean, I do a lot of revising, but I don't even know if I could call when I would put the boundary between this is one draft and this is another draft, because it just keeps like, it's like this blob that, you know, grows and shrinks and gets reshaped. But I don't have any idea how many drafts I write. Is it like one,
Yeah.
or is it 20? It's just,
I mean,
it's really interesting to hear other
a
people's.
draft is like when I take a break, right?
Right.
But I also like, I have it, so I read over the whole book before I start a draft, and then again before I put it aside. So sometimes at that point I like go in for another day and make minor changes.
Right.
But yeah, it's very clearly delineated in my mind, but like it's easy for me to see how that wouldn't really be the case. You'd have like the first draft and then revisions, and then.
And this is just like a nosy question on my part, but do you ever, like, when you, because you're setting things aside, when you go back to them, do you ever have either the sense, and I mean, I'm laughing at myself because I have had both of these, where you go, oh, like, this is good, like, good job, past self, like, this is better than I remember. But then there's also the like, oh, I thought this book was really great. And do you ever have either of those, or is it just how you remember it?
Like definitely, like I forget quite well, like what, like the setting aside for a month or two, like definitely, like my brain forgets a lot of it. And yeah, sometimes I'm surprised or pleasantly or otherwise. So, yeah.
Yeah, I went back to a draft today that I started a long time ago. And I didn't remember most of it, but I was like, oh, I'm pleasantly surprised by this. This is okay. Good job, Jenny. Good job, past Jenny.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see if it stays that way. But so before we kind of leave process, we have a relevant question here from that SOPO. For your indie books, do you have a professional editor? What's that process like? The indie books all feel as polished as Donut Fall in Love.
So yes, I do have an editor for my indie books, and she like had previously worked at one of the big publishers in the past. I don't have a separate round of developmental and copy edits for my indie stuff.
Do you want to maybe just pause for people who are watching who may not know what developmental edits are? Just kind of break it down.
Yeah, so developmental is more like the structural issues, not like nitty gritty grammar stuff. Whereas a copy editor is like on a sentence by sentence level, and they'll also check continuity if your timeline makes sense, your grammar, typos, stuff like that. Then they'll also be proofreading after that as well.
Great. Okay, so I want to go back and ask you, actually my kind of biggest, it's more of an observation, I guess, but it's kind of a question. So your hero is a comedian, and consequently, in the book, we are seeing either bits of his stand-up routine or bits of like YouTube videos of him. And some of them are so funny. Like I feel like I am actually seeing a stand-up comedy routine. Like, have you ever thought about going into stand-up comedy? I mean, I know your answer is probably going to be no, but like these feel like real. I'm going to try to recount one now, and it's not going to be funny, but like there's this point at which he's talking about I don't know, he's talking about backlash, about explaining homosexual relationships to kids, and he's saying like, how hard is it to say Timmy has two mommies? And he's like, there are things that are hard to explain to kids, and he like lists them off, and it's like, you know, systemic racism, gerrymandering. I don't know, I just cackled at that. Like I could actually, like that could work as a stand-up routine. So you know, do you want to add to another job and start going to open mic nights?
No. So I actually am not a huge stand-up person, and I'm not actually sure why I decided to write a hero who's a stand-up comedian, given that I don't watch a ton of it. And like most of what I watched was research for this book. But for some reason, like in Donut Fall in Love, I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. And then actually earlier drafts of this had more stand-up in them, believe it or not. And then our agent was like, you don't need all of this. And then so I cut some out, and then the editor was like, yeah, you don't need all this.
Well, I think that there was a
So-
good amount of it that was delightful, and I think that there's like some kind of deadpan delivery that is, I mean, it's him, but obviously you wrote it, so I don't know. I think if you get tired of this gig, you can expand a little bit into could moonlight.
I did write like a book on like becoming a stand-up comedian, and like it's called Mastering Stand-Up, which partly was about performance, but like just like writing jokes and stuff.
You read a book?
Yeah, I read a book about.
Oh, okay. I misheard you. I said you just said, oh, I did write a book called Mastering Stand-Up. I was like, okay, well, way to bury the lead there. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I don't know why I found it kind of fun to write. I feel like I'm sort of getting the impression that it really works for some readers and it doesn't for others. But
that's like real stand-up comedy,
but
right?
that's the thing. Like some real stand-up comedians, I don't find them funny at all.
Right.
And the other problem is that some of them are only funny in person, sort of like if you just read their jokes on the page, you would not find it that funny. So I try to put that in the book, like acknowledging that, like if you don't think it's funny, like maybe it's actually funnier if you see him saying it. Like I read a book by a very famous stand-up comedian when I was working on this book, and it was Jerry Seinfeld. So he's famous enough that he can just put his jokes on the page, right, and sell his book. Not everyone can do that. And I didn't find it that funny. I was like, oh, this is mildly entertaining, but I didn't find it that funny. And like I said, I'm not a big stand-up person, and there are a lot of stand-up comedians that don't work for me at all.
Oh, for sure. Me
for
too.
one reason or another.
But then the ones that do, I guess maybe Mel works for me, and that's why I laughed so hard.
Yeah. So I sort of feel like the response to his comedy is sort of like how I like reasonable considering how people react to different stand-up comedians.
Right.
But it does make you wonder. You're like, that's kind of the issue with putting like a character's like art or their profession on the page, is that especially in an artistic way, like it may or may not work for everyone.
Well, and so I had two thoughts when I read it. This is exactly why I was interested in this from a craft point of view. And I was thinking about, now don't laugh at me, but when you, like a lot of Shakespeare's plays have songs in them. And when you read those plays, or when I read those plays, not that I do really that much anymore, but when I was younger and I was a student, I was reading a lot of Shakespeare, I would just like skip the songs. But when you see a good production, the songs are delightful, So it's like, I find it to be not, here I am, Jenny Holiday criticizes Shakespeare, but you know what I'm saying? Like there is definitely a page performance thing. And the other thing that it made me think of is both reading and writing rockstar books, because there have to be songs in them. But we don't need to like hear or read the songs, but like songs are part of their life. And that's something that I, again, as a reader, I kind of usually gloss over. And the one rockstar book I wrote, there is no, like, you're not reading the lyrics of the song. Because mostly because I just didn't, I don't know, I just didn't think I could do it. If I could write rock songs, I probably would be writing rock songs. But anyway, so this is a long way of saying, like, good job on this stand-up comedy. I thought it was hilarious. Gerrymandering. Okay. So I love how Canadian this book is and how like Toronto it is. I mean, I imagine it probably works beyond that sphere, works probably for other people. I'd imagine that given that you have an American publisher, probably most of your readers are American. But I love the view of Toronto in this. It's like the Toronto that I recognize. And I love, and I guess it's the American heroes, but my favorite part about this book is that the hero's grandmother is a super Shania Twain fan, and she forces her family to do Shania Twain only karaoke. I just love that. Like, noodle on that a bit, noodle on the Toronto/Canada content in your books.
Yeah, I mean, that's partly just like, I like writing what I know because it's easier. And I feel like also there could be more Toronto, Canada content in romance. So yeah, I don't know. It's just something and it's basically all I know because I've lived here my whole life except for university. So yeah, and I also have a scene where his grandma is asking her questions about Canada.
Right.
Yeah, which was sort of meant to reference the way people ask Asian people ridiculous questions sometimes. Like if you're a Canadian, sometimes those questions, like she's like, do you know any moose? Kind of like, do you know Shania Twain? Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like, or, do you know my friend who lives in Vancouver? Actually, no, that's thousands of miles away. But
yeah.
And so that kind of leads me to another question. So you write frequently about Asian Canadians, which is like a population that's very, very common in Toronto, but probably less so in fiction, although maybe that's changing partly due to people like you. So what has that been like for you?
Like I like just putting people who could be people I know into books. And I like reading about that too. So I don't know. It's just something that when I started, when I first wrote Grumpy Fake Boyfriend, I sort of like deliberately decided at least one character in all my books would be Chinese Canadian, or one of the main characters in all my books would be Chinese Canadian.
Right. Right. Well, I think when it comes to that, and when it comes to the place that your book's set, like there is an authenticity that probably comes through, and makes for a good read. So building on the Toronto question, I think that food is a major part of your brand, and I don't necessarily mean brand like, like you're, cynically marketing yourself, but like food seems to be genuinely something that you love. And you seem to, based on your social media feeds, like eat a lot of really good looking, interesting food. So, and then it's in your books too.
Yeah. So
I don't really know what my question is. Maybe it's more of an observation, but I love that.
It wasn't like when I started this pen name, it wasn't like something I was deliberately trying to put in my books, but then after like a couple books, you see it less so in Grumpy Fake Boyfriend, but definitely in Mr. Hotshot CEO. Like it was something people commented on and liked, so it was more deliberate beyond the first 3 or 4 books, because it was something that people were noting about my books and liked. So from then on, it became more deliberate. And I, like, because of the pandemic, I didn't eat out as much then, but we would usually go out to eat once a week. So most of the things that I eat outside the home show up on social media.
But and I don't know if it's
so.
And I don't know if it's your taste in food or your photography skills or both, but like you always make everything look very interesting, and you get like the food envy when you see your pictures. And then it made its way in, and then it made its way into the title of Donut Fall in Love. I loved that. That was funny.
Yes.
So tell me, what are some of your either all-time favorite books or current favorite books? Like, give us some reading recommendations.
So right now I am, wait just a second, I'm gonna look something up because my mind just suddenly blanked. I read this really interesting book called Disorientation, which is not a romance, but a satire of basically academia, and with a Taiwanese American PhD student. That's sort of unlike anything I'd ever read before. Yeah, it came out earlier this year. I think it was actually optioned for film rights recently. Yeah, I really like that. It's sort of like, I feel like the blurb of the book like doesn't really do it justice.
Well, I come from academia, so I would enjoy reading that, a satire in that world. I think
it's very much Asian American though. Like it's sort of like an Asian. It's very Asian American. Like I was like, at some point I was like, maybe I'll get my dad to read it because of academia, and then I was like, I don't think he would like fully appreciate everything, but he could still read it, of course. But yeah, so that was really interesting for me. I read Mia Hopkins' Tanked not too long ago, which was one of the first, I think it was the first romance I'd read that took place post COVID-19, where it was like explicitly in text. and I thought it was handled well. So right now I'm reading your book.
Oh.
Yeah,
Ah,
which came out earlier.
that
this
was not a that seems like it was like a product placement, but it was not.
No. And like occasionally I'm getting like, oh, that sounds so nice about the winter scenes. They're like eating outside at the restaurants and like going in for sleigh rides. And I was like, Jack, you hate winter. Like, it's not actually like that when it comes here.
It's like the Hallmark version of winter.
Yeah. Like winter in Toronto is like,
Slush.
you know, like there's like 5 nice days a year kind of thing. Yeah. And then after, it's sort of like Christmas romance season now. Since we're almost at Halloween.
Yeah, I feel like Halloween romance season or like fall romance season and Christmas romance season have converged, and all the books come out at the same time in the fall. Like not exaggerating. Like I feel like it's the same week they start, and they're the fall leafy spooky books and the Christmas books, and then the Christmas books kind of dribble out beyond that. But I don't know why. I mean, I think it's because what they always tell me is that bookstores want to have the Christmas books available in the fall. I don't know. So I don't know why they don't want to have the fall books available in July, but they don't.
I guess because people don't really think about it months in advance, where some people think about Christmas months in advance.
And the booksellers may be doing more of a push themselves on Christmas books than they would, and there's more of them, so they maybe want to be more organized. I don't know, but
for my indie Christmas books, I don't put them out before November. But like that's a bit different because they're not on shelves, or not usually on shelves. So
right. Okay. I feel like maybe I'm wrong because you just talked about Mia Hopkins, but I feel like you and I are both having a moment where we're reading like non-romance books, maybe more than romance books.
I did have I was basically read 3 books in a row, whereas like I'm going to read the big Asian American books of the year.
Okay.
Some of them.
Okay.
I still have like a couple more, I guess, but yeah, at some point I was like, after I do this every like, I don't know, it happens like I read a lot of romance, and then periodically I'll be like, I need a break, and then I'll look for like 2 to 4 books and then go back to it. So
well, if anybody likes thrillers, I can highly recommend I should back up. Like, I don't have a lot of experience with thrillers. I haven't historically, I've thought that I don't like them. My mom was a librarian, and she is not a romance person. And she was always into like gory, like murder type books, which I am not. But I read, there's a Toronto author called Samantha M. Bailey, who wrote a book called Watch Out for Her. And if anybody watching this is into thrillers, like domestic thrillers where there's no like torture or whatever, highly recommend. Like, blew my mind, and I want more people to read it so that we can talk about it.
Yeah, my husband reads thrillers, and sometimes I read them too, but
We'll see if he's read Watch Out for Her. It's like,
no,
about this.
I don't think he has. Yeah.
Okay. I won't belabor the point because nobody needs to hear a monologue in a book that nobody else is interested in. But the point, it's from 2 points of view. And, you know, like the whole unreliable narrator thing is like a thing now in that kind of fiction. But like both of the narrators, when you're in them, you totally get where they're coming from. You understand their point of view. But then when you swoop out, you're like, both of these things can't be true. So like, it's just like a masterclass in point of view, I think, but I'm in awe of it. Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Nope. Okay. So tell us what's next for you in your production line of books that I'm in awe of how many you put out.
So I have a Kobo original coming out in January. That's, or at least now, called Not Your Valentine. So it's a Valentine's Day fake dating novella. So that.
And is Kobo original mean that it's only ever going to be on Kobo, or it's got like a lead time on Kobo?
It's only going to be in Kobo unless I get my rights back, though it is also on Overdrive, so you can get it at libraries.
At the library.
Yeah, or I mean, it might also be on like Kobo affiliated
True.
book places in Europe, but I'm not exactly.
Right. And we should probably mention that anybody can download the Kobo app for any device. You don't need an actual Kobo.
Yeah.
Okay, so where can people find you online?
So I am Jackie Lau Books on Twitter and on Instagram, and I have a Facebook page, and the website is jackielaubooks.com. And Jenny and I have a Facebook group with Farah Heron called Northern Heat. And I actually pulled up these postcards that you made.
Oh my gosh, those old postcards, yes.
Like when we had more in-person stuff, like 2019.
I say back when we went places and saw people without screens between us.
So that was, I think that was 2019. So you can find both of us there. And we also have an in-person event on November 26th in Toronto, if you're in Toronto, where we're going
to be doing a pop-up bookstore with Happily Ever After books. So if anybody's local, even if you're not local and you don't want to come to the event, Happily Ever After Books is a new, well, I guess it's not that new-ish, indie bookstore based in Toronto. She's doing pop-up events now, and she has an online store, and I think eventually hopes to have a brick and mortar store. It's kind of like I think it's Canada's only / first romance bookstore. And you can order books from them. So you could order either of our books from them. But you can also order them and pick them up in person at a bar in Toronto called Society Clubhouse. If you go to, I think, either of our Instagrams or Twitters or whatever, you'll find info on that. I was kind of wrapping up here, but we have one more question. Oh, it's from Marissa. Oh, no, it's not. It's from Katie Marks, who asked, is your January release up for pre-order yet?
No. It will probably be up for pre-order in December, I hope. I just sent it in like yesterday. So
this is the Kobo one?
Yeah.
And what's after that?
So I have 2 indie series that I hope to start next year, but I am not entirely sure on the timeline. The one series, I've written 2 drafts of the first book. That's a novella series, and the other series I planned out like a year ago, but I haven't actually started writing any of them yet. So I might do that as my nano book, but probably there won't be any indie books till at least April. Okay. I'm not entirely sure what the schedule is going to be.
Hi, Marissa. Is there anything else we want to add or say before we wrap up, Jackie?
No, I think that's
I don't have a physical copy of your book. So no, this part where I'd hold it up and I'd say, the Stand Up Groomsman, you can buy it wherever you buy books. Is it an audio too?
Yes, it is an audio, yes.
You should buy it from Love Sweet Arrow if you can manage it. And I believe that they would send it to you in Canada too, wouldn't they? Yes, they would. Great. Well, thank you so much for having us, Love Sweet Arrow.
Thank you.
Congrats, Jackie, on your release.
Thanks.
And I guess we'll wrap it up here.